This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. Last week, Russian forces in 4 Ukrainian oblasts, Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia, all announced they would be holding referenda on accession to the Russian Federation. The next day, Putin shocked both the world and Russia by announcing a partial mobilization to bolster Russia's faltering army and support these accession efforts, and implied that the Kremlin would use nuclear weapons to defend these new territories. However, mobilization hasn't gone as smoothly as Putin might have hoped, with widespread protests erupting after the announcement, the most significant of which are occurring in Dagestan. And it also doesn't look like the West has been deterred by his nuclear threat, with reports that the US is preparing for the biggest Ukraine support package yet. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what's happened in the last couple of days, the protests in Dagestan, and how the mobilization might affect the trajectory of the war going forward. So let's start by looking at the referendums. On Tuesday, Russian occupying forces in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia announced they would be holding referenda over the coming weeks on accession into Russia. As you'd expect, most of the international community quickly decried these referenda as illegitimate. Not least because, well, it's an active war zone and Russia doesn't even control any of these oblasts in their entirety. Both the White House and the EU described them as sham referenda. But even countries who are usually more neutral on the issue went out of their way to criticise them. Turkey stated that, as with Crimea, it does not recognise Russia's unilateral annexation attempts, and both India and China made pointed statements reiterating their support for, quote, sovereignty and territorial integrity. Even Serbia, who've so far been pretty cushy with Moscow, came out against the referenda, arguing that it would be, quote, against their national interests for Serbia to endorse Russia's territorial claims. While this doesn't mean that countries like Serbia have suddenly turned against Russia, it's a symptom of the fact that as Russia's quote-unquote special military operation becomes a war involving mobilization and annexation of Ukrainian territory, other countries like India and China will find it harder and harder to defend. Anyway, these referenda concluded on Monday, and Russian state media has already claimed that turnout in all 4 oblasts exceeded 50%, which, according to Russian law, means the results are legitimate. This is somewhat implausible, not least because Ukraine still controls territory, accounting for over 50% of the population in Zaporizhia, but it also allows Putin to claim the territories are now part of the Russian Federation. So that's what's happening with the referendums. They're clearly illegitimate, but as expected, Putin is nonetheless going to claim the territories as part of the Russian Federation. On to the other big thing that happened last week, the mobilization. As we explained in our last Ukraine video, on Wednesday morning, Putin announced a partial mobilization. As opposed to a general mobilization, which would require any man between the ages of 18 to 60 to join the military, a partial mobilization only requires a fraction of those men with military experience to join the front lines. According to Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, who spoke after Putin on Wednesday, the mobilization would only involve reservists who had recently completed their initial military service, with exceptions for students and those working in certain sectors of industry. Shoigu said that this would cover roughly 300,000 men, but he also stressed that the mobilization would happen in stages. In practice, this seems to be a way for the Kremlin to justify its policy of drafting disproportionate numbers of ethnic minorities, often from poorer republics. This theme actually predates the mobilization. Independent analysis has found that a disproportionate number of casualties in Ukraine are Russian ethnic minorities. Take Buryatia, for example, a mountainous republic in eastern Siberia, some 3,500 miles from Moscow, where ethnic Russians make up a small minority. Since the war in Ukraine began, the region has seen a casualty rate about 5 times the national average. While some of this variation might be explained by the fact that Buryatia is poorer than average, and poorer men are more likely to go into the army, the fact that basically every ethnic minority region has seen higher than average casualty rates does suggest that the Kremlin are actively seeking ethnic minorities for their war in Ukraine. Anyway, this trend seems to have continued with the mobilisation. There are reports that basically every military-age ethnic Buryat has been issued with conscription notices, including students and older men with no military experience, who were explicitly excluded in Shoigu's address. It's a similar story in Dagestan, which has seen a casualty rate 3 times the national average so far. Attempts to enforce conscription have triggered widespread protests across the region, and there have been reports of protesters clashing with police and blocking highways to prevent the transfer of conscripts. In an attempt to ease the outbreak of anger, a couple of days ago, Dagestan's governor Sergei Melikov admitted on Telegram that, quote, mistakes have been made during mobilisation, and stressed that mobilisation should be carried out according to the rules set out by Shoigu on Wednesday. Over 100 people have been arrested in the regional capital Makhachkala, according to OVD Info, an independent Russian human rights monitor. But it's been nearly a week now and the protests have shown no sign of subsiding. It's hard to say how this will play out, but it doesn't look good for Putin. Dagestan has a history of Islamist and separatist violence, and it's not clear Russia has the military capacity to contain a full-on revolt, if it comes to that. Nonetheless, while there's been some protests in Moscow and disquiet in Russia's more remote regions, it's important not to overstate the degree of opposition to the mobilisation. It's clear at this point that the vast majority of Russians support Putin's war in Ukraine, and the mobilisation should provide at least a few 100,000 further troops for the Kremlin's war machine. This has 2 implications for the war going forward. First, it means that the next few months will be Ukraine's best chance in the medium term to make further gains, because it'll take at least a few months for these conscripts to arrive on the battlefield. And second, it'll mean that Ukraine will require more support from the West if it wants to overpower a restacked Russian army. The US is apparently aware of this. There have been reports that the White House is planning a further $12 billion worth of support, which would be the largest single package yet. All in all, it looks like the next few months will be crucial in the outcome of the war. And ultimately, every day this war continues is a tragedy. So if you need a bit of a distraction from the news cycle, we also have a bunch of more fun videos too.
Like our team attempting the British citizenship test.
I just don't care. This sort of stuff is so it's completely irrelevant.
Dame Ellen MacArthur.
I'm going to go with Francis Drake.
MacArthur.
Dame Ellen MacArthur. Francis Drake, but... I mean, the answer is true, isn't it? But it's just not true.
Who knows that? Who actually knows that?
Our blooper reel, our office tour, and our interview with TV expert Scott Bryan about why Piers Morgan and Talk TV are failing. Now, all of these videos are exclusive to the streaming service that we made with our creator friends, Nebula. Now, don't worry, I know that times are really tough at the moment, and that's why it's good news that Nebula is only about $1 a month if you sign up using the Nebula Curiosity Stream bundle. Here's how it works. We reached out to the good chaps at Curiosity Stream and said, hey, you have a superb streaming service full of some of the most high-quality documentaries available online. They emailed back saying, you mean highest quality, but sure. Now, I don't always appreciate pedantry like this, but they're right, we should have said highest, and they put forward an offer that we couldn't refuse. They said that anyone who signed up to their streaming service using this link, it's in the description, don't worry, will get access to Nebula absolutely free. Now, I like free things, so we said yes. So if you click the link below, you'll pay less than $15 a year for Curiosity Stream and all of the extra TLDR stuff on Nebula. That's just over $1 a month. So get yourself exclusive TLDR videos that will never come to YouTube. All of our videos ad-free, and some of our videos earlier than they come to YouTube by signing up now. For legal reasons, this exchange is entirely fictionalized, and honestly, I don't know how the deal was done. I'm not a legal kind of guy, so I wasn't in the room when it happened anyway. Also, just because I made this up doesn't mean that the rest of the stuff in this video wasn't true. Everything else I say is always 100% accurate, okay? Regardless, you should sign up.